I thought I would start by just getting some of the housekeeping out of the way and just letting you know what the Criminal Justice Task Force, Interfaith Criminal Justice Task Force, has been doing this year. This is a list of our presentations. They've all been very interesting and I think very productive. Jennifer Sobel Fred Nelson is executive director of the Inside Out Network, which is a computerized platform to link people in prison to services outside when they get out. Jennifer Sobel's executive director of the Prison Project is a very dynamic young lady, changing the public perception of parole and prisoners, and in recruiting pro bono law firms to represent people for clemency petitions. Melissa Odell at Defy Ventures is executive director for Illinois. Defy is standing up a number of re-entry programs in Illinois, starting with the one at Kewanee Correction Center, for which I and have a volunteer, as well as Jeffrey Jones, who's part of our first Unitarian task force. And in May, we had Amy Campanelli, Cook County Public Defender, describe her programs. So in order to be, if anyone wants to be on a mailing list who's not already, send me your information or put it in the chat box and I'll put you on the list. Okay, so let's get into the the future agenda for reform in Illinois. And I want to start with a quote which I think is relevant, and that is what the role of trust in a lot of things is, in particular in this case, in rehabilitation of people in prison. And this is from a book principally by Fernando Flores, who has done a lot of coaching for executives in business. And he says, trusting is a choice. A decision, and authentic trusting takes into primary account the way the relationship will change as the result of that choice. And we've all had the experience of trusting our kids and seeing them rise to the occasion. And I think that's the kind of thing he's getting at when he says this. Okay, so I thought I'd first of all review what are the things that people take offense to. And there are all kinds of them here, which you can read and maybe think of examples for. People object to radically different people for no good reason other than they're radically different. They get infuriated when people violate what they consider to be public morality or strong social norms. And the best example of that, I guess, is in the Arab world, where many of the sexual roles are very strongly scripted, and people get really upset when they're violated. People take offense to disruption and people who demand excessive attention. They take offense to mental illness and addictions. Even though people can't control them, they take offense to vagrancy. And that's been a series of of court decisions which have said that vagrancy is not illegal. It once was, but the Supreme Court has said you cannot prosecute somebody for being on the street. then people take offense to anybody who's of an ethnicity that they don't want. And we're seeing that all the time now in areas where there are large numbers of immigrants of different ethnicities that people are not used to. They take offense to illicit financial gain. When somebody is playing by the rules or taking advantage. And they also take offense to evil intent and wishing harm to someone for personal gain. And that's the real nub of the criminal aspect of things, is, I think, is evil intent. So what offenses should be crimes? I suggest that it's generally actions that hurt other people. Crimes are defined by legislation and regulations. But what about the gray areas? What about actions for physical or emotional survival at the unintended expense of other identifiable people? What about actions as part of an inclusive social group, whether intended or not? And the police department certainly qualifies as that. Actions that cause harms that are not foreseeable by the participant. And there's the agency murder rule, when people are charged with a crime even though they weren't even aware of what was going on. And what about what should be foreseeable and what awareness do people have? And I think the inclination is to let kids and young people off the hook as not being aware of what the implications are and not making a real choice. And finally, what actions by established social patterns that are enabled or endorsed by dominant groups, perceptions, and that violate legal rights or principles should be made criminal. And obviously, one of the dominant medical groups in the past has been the police department that has trampled over rights. And still many of those actions are really not illegal. They're subject of disciplinary action if it can be accomplished, but not illegal, except in really egregious instances such as the murder of by Laquan McDonald. Okay, so people get in trouble, and Cook County has adopted this as their model for how things are handled. If over here on the left is where people are noted and picked up, so to speak, as a problem. Usually law enforcement gets involved as the next step, although there's some effort to do what's called deflect people to the mental health system who should be. The second stage is when people are detained, and for many, many offenses they can be. The next step in the whole process is that they're kept in jail or released and referred to a court, sometimes a specialty court such as a mental health court that helps them deal with their mental illness. And finally, they have a trial at this dispositional level and can be sent to prison, or if they're coming from prison, go back to prison. And following that, they go to parole. But they can be sentenced to probation, in which case they don't go to prison, but they're kept on probation for a period of time. So I'd like to look at the what gets reported to the police. A little bit different in suburban Cook than in Chicago. As you can see, there's more theft reported in the suburbs than in the city, and more violent things reported in the city, more in the way of aggravated assault, robbery, and murder is a very small piece of it, by the way, if you'll notice. It's only 1% in both cases. Criminal sexual assault is likewise only 1%. And yet, to listen to the news, you'd think it was all over. Well, it's not. It's only a small piece. Okay, so what happens when people get picked up by the police? They can be, they go to a bond hearing if it's a serious offense. If it's a misdemeanor, they may just get a citation and be released with a court date, having come back to court. But if it's a serious offense, then they have a bond hearing. And there's been a number of efforts to reform the bond system in recent years. And this reflects the status after those reforms were implemented. And that was in the summer of 2018. And it was done via, there was a change in state law, a nuanced change, not a big one. And then a order by the chief judge of Cook County, Timothy Evans, to the judges to basically to set money bonds that people can afford, the families at least can afford. So when people are arrested, they go for a bond hearing the very next day. The judge can release people on their own recognizance without bail money, called an I-bond, or with electronic monitoring, or both. They can be required to post money bail, that's called a C or D bond, or they can be held as imminent dangers with no bail at all. So the proportion of people released on I-bonds and lower money D-bonds has substantially increased since the summer of 2018, when Chief Judge Timothy Evans directed the judge to set bail amounts that families can afford. But there are still many people who are unable to post even modest amounts of bond, and who must sit in jail, sometimes for years, until their case is disposed of by dismissal, plea deals, or trial. And about half of the cases are dismissed. So people are sitting in jail only to have their case dismissed. Frequently, prosecutors use high charges to extract guilty pleas for lesser charges, hopefully a practice that is not occurring as much under State Attorney Kim Fox, who is of a more progressive mind. So with, as you can see, many people do get out on bail. I'm not showing the percentages, but it's greatly increased. And the consequence of that is that the population in Cook County Jail is lower. It started over here in 2014, as around 10,000. And by 2018, it's looks like 5,000 on this chart. Currently, and then this year it went down to 4,200, and currently it's about 3,800. So 3,800 instead of 10,000 people sitting in jail because of partly because of the effort to get people out for the COVID virus epidemic. So it's around 3,800 now. The yellow line here shows the confined population. The green line below it, which is fairly stable, that's the one that's down at the bottom, is the population on home confinement with electronic monitoring. This population was around 4,600, was around 2,100 in April. and it has jumped to 3,500 as a result of the people who've been discharged to get them out of the way of the COVID virus. It's been a big push, and it has caused a lot of rethinking, and hopefully some of it will stick after the COVID virus is over. Okay, so what's the story about crime in recent years? This is the number of property crimes in Cook County, which has declined since 2001, which is a peak. Not even, it's been longer than that. Since 1990, it's declined here. It's at a relatively low level. These are the blue line are the offenses, and this is what actually, where the people that actually get arrested. And as you can see, that's a steady decline since 1988 even, for property crimes. For violent crimes, it has declined likewise since around 1991. Again, the same pattern. The number of arrests is actually only a small fraction, of the offenses reported. Here are the actual arrests by various crimes, by seriousness. Felonies are the dark green line. Misdemeanors are more numerous and are the blue line above. Both have declined since 2005 on this chart. Here are the felony cases filed, which again have declined since 1993. So what's the big deal with crime rates? And why is the public so afraid? Well, I think part of it is epidemic violence, and I'm using those words in a very intentional way. It is an epidemic, many as the result of prior traumas and targeted killings associated with drug trade deaths. So as a throwaway comment on my part, why not make all drugs legal and regulate them with the FDA, just like prescription drugs are? Anyway, let's go on. Here are the trends for drug law violations at Cook County. That's again, they've gone down steadily since 1998 about, and the marijuana charges have gone down since about 2010, even before the legalization took place here in 2019. So what does this all mean for admissions to state prison? Well, they peaked here in terms of numbers around 2003, and they've gone down fairly steadily since. That doesn't mean the population has gone down nearly as much, because there are numbers of people that are getting sentenced to extremely long terms. There are about half as many people in a year referred to state prison as were in 2001. Okay, here's in terms of raw numbers of referrals, here are the main ones for which people get sent to prison. And you notice the only violent offense that shows up here is the weapons offenses. These are drug possession. Burglary is not robbery. It's taking things when people aren't there. And theft, I guess, could be a violent offense, but I don't think it is. Drug trafficking isn't. So most people get sent to state prison for these nonviolent offenses. Okay, so this shows the people from Cook County who are in jail or under custody. The number of people in prison is the dark line. The number of people on probation, almost as many, is the blue line. Then there's a smaller number that have been released from prison on mandatory supervised release. That's the dotted line below here. Okay, so what does that mean for jail and prison populations? Well, and this is statewide totals now. In the state of Illinois, the populations in jails have gone down since about 2005. And most of all, actually 2010, most of that decline is in the pretrial population. In prisons, it has also gone down from a high of around 43,000 here in about 2010 to 39. I think it's actually 38,000 something at the moment. This is a little bit blurry, and I apologize for that, but I blew it up a lot. I think you can get the idea. This shows the incidence of people incarcerated by race. And as you can imagine, the red line are Black people, and then the other categories of ethnicity are the lines below. But as you can see, now this shows that Black people were incarcerated at 6.9 times the rate of white people based on population. And in Illinois prisons, the same kind of thing. Black people were incarcerated at 7.9 times the rate of white people, with Native Americans and Latinos, others, at a much lower incidence level. Okay, so what about prison population? Well, the number of admissions to prison is down around 36%. This is from 2006 to 16. That decade, it went down 36%. But the number of people in prison is only down by 10%, and not as much as some other states. So how can incarceration be reduced? Well, I mean, the first answer is to reduce the level of violence, and there are a lot of efforts being made on that score to deal with violence at a community level. There are efforts being made in Cook County, particularly to deflect cases to homeless services and mental health services. And I expect that will continue. There are some restorative justice programs being developed, notably by the Catholic high schools. The Archdiocese has a very major program of restorative justice which serves, by the way, to keep their kids out of trouble and out of the criminal justice system. It's very smart. Then after people get picked up by the police, there are various ways that they can be diverted or subject to deferred prosecution if people rehabilitate themselves through a first offender program or medically assisted drug treatment or things like that. Finally, after people are released from prison, we could keep people out by educating them for re-entry. You know that since around 1995, no prisoner was eligible for a federal Pell Grant for college education. That was terminated in around 1995. And that has had major ramifications throughout the whole country. Under Obama, a pilot program to reestablish them was established at Roosevelt University here in Illinois and also at UIC. And it's a small program, but it's a start and it's a demonstration. So in general, a way to prepare prisoners to come out and earn a living as we would like is to let them educate themselves, give them some support in doing so. And finally, we, the state of Illinois, can handle parole violations in a more sensible and graduated manner. A lot of the readmissions to prison are actually minor parole violations that are handled in a rather ham-handed way by the parole department. And that's reflected here. Let's see. This is recidivism in Cook County. Actually, around 2/3 of the people who come out of prison are rearrested within 5 years. Now, here it shows no new arrest, 32%. Arrest for nonviolent offense, 41%. I suppose a lot of that is drug dealing. And then other arrests are the red and yellow areas. As a consequence of this recidivism, people go back to jail, and it's a revolving door for some people. So where does reform start? Well, it starts with the perception of crime and criminals as human beings capable of learning. Now, that's all very philosophical and nice, but there are some specifics that we can work on. First of all, is to eliminate money bond entirely. I'm going to get more into each of these. Secondly, to reduce prison populations and improve conditions. And thirdly is to reinstate parole and good time programs, which give prisoners an incentive to work on things and to comply with regulations and not get into trouble when they're in prison. As far as improving pretrial practices and eliminating money bail, pretrial processes have a dramatic effect on rates of conviction. People detained in jail are 4 times as likely to be sentenced to jail. And a lot of that is people pleading guilty just to get out. They have 3 times greater likelihood of being sentenced to prison. Now, this has been a matter of some advocacy with the Chicago Community Bond Fund, with Community Renewal Society, with our task force, we have this is a multi-year effort. We have attended hearings downtown on pretrial practices that the Supreme Court staged last year. And by the way, I think the Bond Fund really did a magnificent job in organizing the testimonies for those hearings. Well, it paid off. The Supreme Court has just in April issued its final report on pretrial processes. And I'm going to quote a few things from the report just to give you a feeling for where they're coming from and where they're going. The first quote is, "No defendant shall be detained due to his or her inability to meet the financial condition of release." Now that's a pretty unconditional statement. That's wonderful to see there. That's not to say that it's a reality yet, because there are lots of laws which provide otherwise that the judges have to abide with. So it's up to the legislature to enact changes to implement this principle. A second principle that they enunciate is judicial bail decisions shall presumptively favor non-financial release under the least restrictive and individualized conditions designed to promote reasonable assurance of public safety and court assurance. Now, that statement, I dare say, can even be used to advocate for more responsive releases on electronic monitoring as well as non-monetary bail. The next principle they enunciate is, at all pretrial detention hearings, the prosecution shall have the burden to prove by clear and convincing evidence that no conditions of release will reasonably assure the safety of the community or the defendant's appearance in court. In other words, pretrial detention has to have a clear and convincing evidence. And finally, it provides that pretrial services agencies throughout the state shall implement a system of court date reminders, including location, time, and date of the court appearance. Now, that seems pretty innocuous and commonplace, but that is really a dramatic and revolutionary idea in criminal justice. We have it in Cook County, but only because Tony Preckwinkle and the MacArthur Justice Challenge have funded it. So we've had it here for a year, and it works. People in DuPage County have not had it. And the DuPage County State's Attorney is belly aching that people aren't showing up. Well, we know why, because he doesn't remind them, like any doctor's office or any other appointment system that you might think of. And it's really important because this is where our reform of the criminal justice system can start. It's the least controversial area, pretrial process. Elimination of bail is a nationwide movement. It's based on principles generally adhered to in middle and upper income communities, but violated by deeply ingrained practices and depreciation of defendants in Cook County. And all you have to do is go to the Cook County courthouse to see the dismal facilities that do that. Until recently, around 1,500 people were being held in Cook County Jail exclusively for money bail reasons. If people are jailed, they lose jobs, children, dwellings, and the opportunity to organize a defense. And pretrial releases reduces the number of extortionate plea deals, gives people an opportunity to organize a defense to charges, and allows people to present favorably as a member of the community. So all of this needs to be put into legislation. The Chicago Community Bond Fund and Appleseed Foundation already have a draft law, which I'm sure they're working hard on for introduction into the legislature in the next session. I don't think we'll be able to accomplish anything in this session due to the coronavirus. Okay, so beyond that, the reduction in the number of people coming in, what else can we do to reduce the present population? Well, Illinois prisons cost around 1.2 billion a year, plus another 200 million for the medical care contract for prisoners, which is not in the corrections budget, it's in the Department of Human Services budget. So a good place to start is with Governor Rauner's commission for recommendations to reduce sentences and restore good time credit for serious offenses. Now, a few of his recommendations have been implemented, but the legislature has been dragging its heels terribly, and most of them have not been. Another way to reduce prison population is to reduce the sentences for violent and drug crimes. The sentences for violent crimes have gotten way out of hand, and they serve no purpose whatever in deterrence. Most people don't think about the penalty when they do a violent act. So there are a lot of people who did foolish things when they were in their 20s who are sitting in jail for much, much longer than they should be. The ACLU, for its part, has designed a whole program of reduction of sentences of seriousness of drug crimes. And I'm heartily in favor of that myself. Another way is to eliminate the truth in sentencing laws that were passed around 1995 under the Clinton administration, and to reinstate parole, which was eliminated in 1988 in Illinois, based on readiness for release. Recently, there's been efforts to get prisoners 60 or above to be released. There's actually a provision in Illinois law that would permit that. And the number of people 60 or above, many of whom are getting really sick, is grown from 1,400 in 2012, which is what, 8 years ago, to 2,300 today. And the costs for people over 65 are at least 4 times as much as younger people in the general population. And the factor in a prison population is probably much higher because people age faster. And that will cost the state. So another way to reduce the number of people in prison is to reinstate parole and good time. And again, the legislature has been chicken. They have, Barbara Flynn Curry once told me the problem is that the state representatives are largely former prosecutors from downstate, and also the mayors downstate are. And as a consequence, they don't want to think about any reforms. All they want is to enhance the power of the prosecutors to get rid of people that they don't want. So it's an uphill fight. But the abolishment of parole, which I'm not saying was administered in a sensible way when it was in place, I have no idea. But this has resulted in people being sentenced to murder to serve 17 additional years on average, with 30% of the people convicted of murder serving life. So that, among other things, breeds hopelessness and violence in the prison system. The sentences for murder, which are 20 to 60 years and life in certain circumstances, set the pace for the whole range of lesser offenses, which are longer than in former times. So Rauner's commissions proposed a series of sentence reductions. Some good time eligibility has been expanded, but no real sentence reductions. So the first step in reestablishing a parole system was taken in 2019 when, as the initiative of the Juvenile Justice Initiative, parole was reinstated for minors convicted after June of 2019. No retroactivity, unfortunately. How do you restore a more humane environment in prisons? Well, I would suggest that, first of all, you give people a chance to learn, to change, and to demonstrate their readiness for release. You treat people like human beings. Manage illness, mental illnesses as illness. Now, a first step in this was taken in 2019. We did succeed, I'd say we, a whole group of advocate organizations got the state to eliminate the copay to see the doctor, which was $5, and the barrier for some people, a lot of people didn't have it. And until they could demonstrate an emergency, they didn't see the doctor. Well, nominally, professionals are now responsible. And frankly, I don't see why they couldn't be held responsible through malpractice when that's indicated. Prisoners do not have to pay the copay to see a doctor. There are 2 federal consent decrees in place at the initiative of the Uptown People's Law Center to improve mental health services and general medical services in prison. If you've read the federal court monitor of the decree for improvement of mental health, you will see that the mental health services provided in prison are atrocious. Nothing short of a human atrocity. And I think one of the things that justice advocates then do is to publicize that as much and as widely as possible. We should be ashamed of what's going on. And so should the public. The way that mentally ill people are treated actually, I think, affects the management of the entire prison population. They are the most problematic people in many cases, and the guards are simply not equipped to handle them. So they end up in solitary. They end up in Pontiac in solitary confinement for the rest of their stay with no way out. And it's really pitiful. And the responses are generally punitive throughout the whole system instead of managerial. But that's really a result of the lack of training of staff as well. So in order to prepare people for entry, the state has been making effort to do that recently. They've started 2 reentry programs, one at Kewanee and one at Murfreesboro reentry centers. And Defy Ventures plans to expand its activities at other sites here in Illinois. I want to give a shout out to the Illinois Department of Juvenile Justice for what they have done at Warrenville. I'm a visitor for the John Howard Association, and I visited both prisons and the center at Warrenville. And the difference is dramatic. Warrenville is under a consent decree for improvement and of therapeutic services and the handling of juveniles. And I think they're doing a very nice job of handling the kids and young people that are there. I guess they're all under 18. But it is dramatically different than the prisons, all of which that I visited are decrepit, underfunded, with poor facilities for communication of prisoners and a whole bunch of other things. Okay, so what have we accomplished in the last year? This is a rundown of legislation which was actually passed and signed and is now law. I won't go through all of that, but these are all incremental improvements for people, for subject to the criminal justice system, both on the front end and on the back end after people come out, so that they can get jobs and stay out. So I want to, go back to the theme of trust. I think people are in prison because we don't trust them, because of what they've done. And the presumption is that they'll never learn, and that's why they get long sentences. I want to pose a different take on that. I think trust is a skill to be learned, that every human being can learn it. Some never do, but by doing, and they learn it by doing, by interrelating, not by following a recipe. There is no cookbook. But the way to build authentic trust is to trust. And by keeping people penned up 24 hours a day, unable to organize their lives in any way in prison, subject to tight control, we deny them any ability to exercise their muscles in developing skills for trust. And I think that is a shame. That's our shame that we are perpetuating this type of the system here in Illinois. And I'll open it for conversation. Holly?
I'm assuming all this data will, are you going to send this out to any of us? There are two of us on the call who are from Lake County, and I've seen similar statistics, and I'm sort of really curious about that. And my second question is anything being done on a fairly consistent or organized basis around changing the way in which parole is now handled?
Well, there are a number of advocacy organizations. Parole Illinois is one. Illinois Prison Project that I mentioned is another. A lot of the juvenile justice groups are also advocating for parole for young adults, not just people under 18. So yes, but there are no official bodies as yet that have endorsed reestablishing parole in Illinois. Illinois has adopted in 1988, adopted definitive sentences. The flexibility, there is no flexibility in the system at any level. A sentence is a sentence and that's it. You may get some good time for lesser offenses, but generally you serve out at least 85% or 75%, depending upon the offense of the sentence. I think it's going to take some good strategizing to figure out how to qualify that, or I won't say undermine it, but to make it less onerous.
And are you going to be making this presentation available?
Excuse me?
Is this presentation available to those of us on the call?
Yeah, I can just send you out the PowerPoint if you'd like.
I would love that.
Actually, my machine indicates that you are being recorded. So
no, I didn't start any recording. Who's recording? You did?
I'm recording.
Oh, my wife started it. Okay.
well, I just wanted to say that I thought you did a very fair, even-handed, miraculously calm presentation, and of course you brought a lot of information together, and I know you brought it together. You didn't create all of it. My first comment, and I put it in the chat, is just that I thought you have been doing a fabulous job today. I have personally a philosophical difficulty with the foundation that you have that appears to be that, people are basically good and we should be ashamed of how bad this is. I agree with it comes in regard to most of the people who are inside the prisons. But my conviction is that our prisons were virtually set up, and perhaps around the world, prisons exist for the purpose of supporting the dominance of the dominant culture and the dominant people in that culture. And so changing them to do it in a humane way, we're gonna be working on that all our lives. It's a full-time and infinite job, not one where, I mean, I feel as though it's the one where you want to say, we need to provide a wheelchair because this person doesn't have any legs. I mean, the prisons are designed to keep as many as possible of the people who met your list on the first page or two of, quote, undesirable people, quote, out of the way. And how it's done and all of that, to try to make it better, we just have to recognize we're pushing a rock up a hill. That's okay, because it does make it better in some ways from time to time. And I believe that people are sincere in doing that, including yourself among them.
Evan, could I ask one real stupid, quick initial question? What is the difference between prisons and jails?
Oh, that's easy. The jails are administered by counties, and they hold people who are sentenced to petty crimes with a sentence less than 1 year, as well as anybody who's waiting for a trial.
Okay.
Anybody that's waiting for trial that has not been bailed out, or that they feel that they have to keep there. The prisons are exclusively run by the state of Illinois.
Can I just add that in Cook County Jail, there are a lot of people, quote, waiting for trial who've been there more than a year.
Oh, absolutely.
All right, it just needs to be said when you give
Absolutely.
the distinction between the time in terms of the time.
Right. Yep. Finley,
Yeah,
did you want to?
This is Alan. I just, there was one of the pages of your PowerPoint where you had, burglary versus theft.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, Alan's got the floor at the moment. I was asking, I think the difference between burglary and theft is burglary is basically, a robbery or whatever in a home, a residence, whereas theft is outside of a residence, like it's retail theft or it's theft from an auto, like pickpocketing somebody on a, rapid transit, whatever. It's out there outside of a residence. I think if it's in a residence, it's burglary. So I think that's the basic, as I understand it, distinction between burglary and theft. So, and most of the time it doesn't involve, violence, but I guess theft could, as you said, occasionally it could be with a weapon or something. Most of the time it's just like in a store, somebody stealing something.
But isn't robbery where there is a weapon involved? I mean, there is a major distinction.
Yeah,
there.
robbery is right, and particularly armed robbery. Whereas burglary is usually like somebody breaks into your house when you're not there and steals something, or you're asleep and you're not aware of it. Whereas robbery is generally where there's at least a threat of having a weapon, whether they show you it or not, or something. Or
there's
other type of
difference between aggravated robbery and robbery, and I think aggravated is where the weapon is used.
And
Evan, did you read Finley's question in the chat?
Oh, no, I haven't. Okay.
What about data on the white beneficiaries of the bond program and the number of white incarcerated in the Illinois prison system? Are there actually quantitative numbers or just percentages?
Oh, sure. You can get the numbers. Yes.
So,
but they're unrepresentatively small, the whites.
that's why they're called a minority.
Well, they're not a minority, but they still
They are a minority.
in the prison.
Oh, in the prison.
Well, yes, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about in the general population. A minority, unless they're given special privileges, baths, dinners in home, special services, they're in there. They are minority, and sometimes minorities are treated like minorities, like they're not representative of the prison population. That's why the Aryan nation uses the prison as a recruiting ground to say nobody's going to protect you but us. Yep. And I think that so long as we continue to downplay this minority, the white minority of poor folks, white poor folks in the jail system. We're playing into a neo-racist narrative that only black folks and people of color go to jail. Secondly, I think that the penitentiary was invented by Quakers. It was designed as a very progressive way compared to the prison systems in that the Quakers ran into in England with brutality and murder. You were there to show penitence, and once you showed your penitence, then you were let out. Of course, it was not for sort of sadistic killers, I would have not imagined, but it certainly had a very progressive origin. And thirdly, the ideology of criminals as being evil did not originate with the masses of the people. There was a concerted effort with film, dramatizations, heightening motiveless murder, particularly killing of little kids that were going on in the American culture at the time, that gave to the ruling circles, particularly the Clinton administration, an opportunity to justify the billions of dollars they were already anticipating cutting from what they call social justice programs. And the fact that Clinton went to watch a black man who was mentally 6 years old and executed in order to prove he was hard on crime, proved that there was no mass demand for this kind of a brutalitarian approach. So I reject that theory. I think people are open to an alternate vision if somehow this vision was available in the media. There are no films, no movies that can show that except in documentaries, scattered here, there, and yon, there's certainly no special 2.5-hour film about rehabilitation theory, for example, existing in our media. So I think there is an ideological war that's going on here between a minority committed to a brutalitarian approach to criminal justice and a majority that, like any other movement, has not been tapped into, because many of them don't know what we know in this presentation. This is not going out on PBS, nor WBEZ. So that's my comment.
I'd like to make sort of an addition on that. Is I've done a lot of work with the Chicago Money Bond Fund, which sort of morphed into the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice. And they say that whenever they have these sort of positive stories, they don't get picked up by the press. It's sometimes WBEZ will pick it up, PBS, but the standard institutions, of the press are much more interested in sensationalism. And so it does give a very skewed take on what might be not such a, well, that there are a lot of positive things going on.
Yeah, that's very disappointing. What the Tribune has done is fear-mongering recently. I'm not entirely clear where all that is coming from, but we need to address it.
I think it sells newspapers.
Let me give you an update. The Tribune has been taken over.
Yeah.
It's been taken over by a right-wing, very wealthy group of what they call those guys, investors, who have a track record of buying up weakened or failing companies, media companies especially, and they slightly begin to slowly teasing the editorial toward a more of a right-wing, anti-human approach. And I noticed that right away, that wait a minute, they used to be on the forefront of showing how these good things were good, and now they had this one guy who went out and did something terrible. They have a picture of him in the editorial page and a whole description about the Bund thing. Oh, all it's going to do is free up a bunch of criminal people. We got to always remember that, yeah, it may sell newspapers, but at the same time, some people gear it toward selling that kind of news.
So Evan, you should choose somebody to speak.
Yeah, Linda, why don't you go ahead?
I was just going to say, I think it's the front page of the Sun-Times today, which I haven't read yet, but it features an article where the parents of a young man who was killed have come to believe that the man who's in jail for the murder has essentially, feels guilty and is ready to be a good citizen. In other words, the title is forgiveness.
Yeah.
So right along with trust is also forgiveness. And I think that's an important, good that the Sun Times put it out there today, and
Yeah.
good to include when we talk about trust. Some things that have been done were, as many people call it, bad judgment. But bad judgment can harm people. And sometimes
Absolutely.
forgiveness makes a big difference.
Well, when Rauner's commission, when it was in existence, commissioned, or ISAJA did, I'm not sure which, but at any rate, it was reported there that there was a survey of victims of crime, and they do not feel that penalties should be increased as a uniform response. Many of them feel that they don't extract revenge by excessive penalties, and that was a big surprise. It's the first survey of victims of crimes and their families that had been done. So it shattered a lot of preconceptions about where victims are in the picture.
Okay. I'd like to ask, because most of this was focused on both Cook County and Illinois, if you had to look at the federal system in the next 2.5 years, if there's a change in administration and maybe a majority in the Senate, what if you had to look at 3 likely main thrusts for reforms at the federal level, what do you think they might be?
Well, I think an easy one was restoration of Pell Grants for anybody in prison, anywhere. But beyond that, I think that the whole regime for drug regulation needs to be looked at. With the advent now of medically assisted addiction treatment and the coverage of the treatment by Medicaid, extended Medicaid, certainly in those states that have extended Medicaid, there are options for dealing with addictions other than criminalization. Now, and you think that after enough people in the rural areas get put in jail, and by the way, the incarceration rates for people in counties downstate is now higher than it is in Cook County. That people will get tired of seeing their relatives and friends stuck in jail in that kind of way. And that's true across the country as a whole. And I would hope that they'll look at that and do some reform on that score. Alan, there was an action alert too, wasn't there? Anyway, for another bill. Yeah. Holly?
Sort of along those lines, has there been with the pandemic crisis? We're not hearing anything about opioid addiction. What is happening there? And secondly, is anybody talking about reinstating Pell Grants? I think that would be the most fabulous thing we could do.
Yes, there is a bill in the federal I think in the Senate. Is that the one we put an action alert on?
Let me pull it up.
Yeah, but yes, it is up for discussion there. As far as the opiate crisis goes, to my mind, I'm a retired healthcare guy. The primary resource in dealing with the opiate crisis is primary care. And treatment programs that are medically managed. And there has been some growth. They have liberalized the number of people that doctors can maintain on opioid substitutes. And there are increasing number of programs. I think these abstinence programs are a snare and a delusion. They dry people out, and that includes people put in jail. And when they get out, they go right back to what they had been doing because their psychosocial status orientation has not been changed. And so they overdose as a matter because they're no longer as tolerant, and they die. So you can actually look at abstinence programs as something that really kills people by their failure to do a thorough rehabilitation and to do it in a medically responsible way. So I think that's happening. It's the federal government is accommodating it. It's not happening as quickly as we'd all like, but it is happening.
It's my turn, or
Yeah, okay, Finley.
okay? Can I say something?
Yeah.
I guess I can. Okay. Yeah, just real quick, the person who's actually pushing the line that, oops, something's happening to my, okay.
You're good, you're good.
Okay, the person who is pushing the line that the stay-at-home orders are increasing opioid and suicide usage is President Donald Trump. I just want to throw out that he's very concerned about all the deaths he says are being caused by the rise of opiate-oriented suicide and things of that nature, which he attributes to the fact that the blue states are not opening up fast enough, just to show you how good ideas can be twisted by the demonic mind.
I was just
Linda?
gonna say something about what is commonly called white-collar crime. I think trust is something that people are entitled to until they've proven that they're not entitled. And our president is one who is not capable of maintaining any kind of relationship based on anything other than self-centered perception of his own self-interest. And he's not the only human being who's stuck in that kind of mental state. But all the liberal feelings I have about the prisons that you're referring to do not apply, in my view, for repeat offenders at the federal level who have been cheating the public, who have been lying, who've been inviting the Russians to ruin our election, who've been lying about that, who've been getting rich off the disadvantages of others. Somehow or other, my trust doesn't extend to the people who've had every advantage in the world and thinks they need more. Just a personal statement.
Amen.
I agree with what Linda said.
Yeah, go ahead.
I did know what Linda said.
Huh? What?
I was gonna, Andy, are you saying something? I can't hear you, Andrew. Were you saying something?
Yes, I agree with what Linda just said about President Trump and his allies up in the high administration who've been getting rich off of letting the Russians into our elections and getting into so-called prisons up there and then getting back into the administration. I do not think they need to be, they do not get my trust that Evan was referring to in his speech.
All right, I'll just simply add my 4 cents. Voter suppression plus electoral college equals control of the American politics, not the mysterious Russian hackers.
They work together.
No.
Okay, so
nothing to do with it.
Andrew, are you looking or Alan, are you looking to start the business meeting?
Yeah,
Um,
pretty soon.
and
If we're done with our questions, we can
scheduled,
take a 2 or 3 minute break.
And schedule will start in 10 minutes specifically, but we can take at least a 5-minute break if you want now.
Yeah, so we're flexible on that. If people have kind of finished up there, I'm sorry I didn't come up with the. I was looking for that action alert. Maybe from ones I print out, that I'm not finding it.
The Pell Grants, was that what you were saying?
It might have been involving that.
'Cause I don't remember it. I'd love to know about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Evan. That was great.
It was great. I want to ask Evan's wife, Nan, if you'll figure out how to make the video and the presentation available to other people. I have no idea how that becomes possible, but
Well,